If you permit, I will fix it.
Hey.
A billionaire's private jet engine failed. Dozens of top engineers tried, but none could fix it. Just as hope was lost, a homeless girl stepped forward and whispered, "If you permit, I will fix it." No one believed her, until the impossible happened. Imagine this. A billionaire's private jet is grounded. The engine has failed, and the world's best engineers can't bring it back to life. Millions of dollars are on the line, cameras are rolling, and panic fills the air. Then, out of nowhere, a homeless girl steps forward, her clothes torn, her voice steady, and she says just 5 words. "If you permit, I will fix it." Everyone laughs at her, but what happens next will shock the entire world. And before we begin this unbelievable story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video, because you don't want to miss more stories like this. It was a crisp California morning. The sun was rising over the gleaming runways of Los Angeles International Airport, where private jets lined up like silver birds, ready to conquer the sky. Among them stood a massive white and gold Gulfstream G700, the pride of Richard Maxwell, one of America's wealthiest billionaires. He wasn't just rich, he was influential. Maxwell owned Maxwell Dynamics, a multi-billion-dollar aerospace company that supplied engines to airlines, defense contractors, and even NASA. But on this particular morning, Richard's empire was trembling. Inside the hangar, dozens of engineers and mechanics worked frantically around the jet. Tools clattered, laptops beeped, voices shouted instructions. But the sleek machine sat motionless, its left engine refusing to power on. Richard Maxwell, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, his silver hair combed perfectly back, paced with fury. His wristwatch, a limited edition Rolex, gleamed in the harsh lights of the hangar. His company was about to finalize a $4 billion defense contract in Washington, D.C. If he didn't make the flight in 2 hours, the deal would collapse, and so would months of negotiations. "Unacceptable," Richard's booming voice echoed across the hangar. "You call yourselves engineers? This is a Maxwell Dynamics jet engine. My engine! And not one of you can fix it?" An awkward silence followed. One of the senior engineers, Dr. Howard, stepped forward nervously. "Sir, we've tried every diagnostic. The fuel regulator isn't responding. And the ignition system—" "I don't want excuses," Richard snapped, his gray eyes blazing with authority. "I want this jet in the air in 90 minutes. The engineers exchanged worried looks. Some wiped sweat from their brows, others tapped desperately on their laptops. But nothing worked. Outside the hangar, behind a chain-link fence, a young woman sat quietly on a bench, her hood pulled over her messy brown hair. She wore an oversized jacket, faded jeans, and sneakers so worn the soles were peeling. A beat-up duffel bag sat at her feet, and in her hands she held a small notepad where she had been sketching mechanical diagrams. Her name was Emily Carter. To the world, she was just another homeless girl, another forgotten soul wandering the streets of Los Angeles. But Emily's sharp hazel eyes weren't watching the sky or the people rushing past. They were locked onto that jet engine, every detail of its design burning in her mind. For weeks, Emily had been sleeping near the airport, drawn by the sight and sound of aircraft. It reminded her of a past she tried to bury. Once a brilliant mechanical engineering student at MIT, she had lost everything when her parents died in a tragic car accident. With no family and crushing debt, she dropped out, drifting onto the streets. But her passion for machines never left her. Now, as she listened to the billionaire's shouts echoing from the hangar, something stirred inside her. She recognized the problem, almost instantly at least. She thought she did. She had studied Maxwell's engine designs before, back when she still had access to libraries and university labs. She knew their flaws, their intricacies, the way only someone obsessed could know. Emily stood, hesitating. Who would believe her? A homeless girl? Stepping into a billionaire's crisis? She could already imagine the laughter, the sneers, the security guards shoving her away. But then she heard Richard's voice again, sharp and desperate. "If this jet doesn't fly, I'll have the entire engineering division replaced by tomorrow." Her heart pounded. Maybe this was insane, maybe it would get her arrested, but Emily's instinct screamed louder than her fear. Clutching her notepad, she walked toward the hangar gates. The security guards spotted her instantly. "Hey, you can't be here," one barked, stepping in front of her. Emily lifted her chin, her voice surprisingly steady. "Let me through. I can fix it." The guard blinked, then burst out laughing. "What? Fix a billion-dollar jet engine? Lady, move along before I call the cops." By now, a few of the engineers had noticed the commotion. They snickered and shook their heads, whispering among themselves, a girl in torn clothes. Claiming she could succeed where top engineers failed, it was ridiculous. But Emily didn't back down. She raised her voice, clear and firm. "If you permit, I will fix it." The words cut through the noise of the hangar like a blade. Everyone turned to look, including Richard Maxwell himself. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Richard's sharp gaze landed on the young woman standing at the gate, her hoodie pulled low, her eyes burning with determination. The billionaire frowned. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Emily took a breath. Her voice didn't shake. "Someone who knows what's wrong with your engine." The Dever on the 7. The hangar erupted in laughter. Engineers chuckled. Guards rolled their eyes. Even Richard let out a cold, dismissive smirk. But Emily didn't laugh. She didn't even flinch. She stood her ground, gripping her notepad, her gaze locked on Richard's. And for the first time that morning, the billionaire felt something strange. Something he hadn't felt from his own team of experts. A spark of confidence. The laughter echoed through the hangar like a cruel symphony. Engineers nudged each other, guards smirked, and a couple of mechanics openly pointed at Emily, shaking their heads. To them, she wasn't a threat. Not even a nuisance, just comic relief in the middle of a stressful disaster. Richard Maxwell, however, wasn't laughing. His gray eyes narrowed, studying the girl at the gate. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't stutter. Most people crumbled under his stare. CEOs, politicians, generals. Yet here stood a ragged homeless girl, meeting his gaze without blinking. "Open the gate," Richard commanded. The guards exchanged a nervous look. "Sir, she's—" "Did I stutter?" Richard's tone dropped like steel. The guards immediately unlatched the gate. Emily stepped inside, her sneakers scuffing against the polished hangar floor. The entire engineering crew turned to face her. She looked so out of place, surrounded by men and women in pressed uniforms, toolkits worth thousands of dollars, and laptops humming with advanced diagnostics. Emily's oversized jacket and worn-out jeans made her look like she had wandered in from another world. Dr. Howard, the lead engineer, crossed his arms. His tie was loosened, his forehead drenched in sweat. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a waste of time. We're dealing with a complex systems failure, not a—" He glanced at Emily with disdain. "Not a street experiment." Emily ignored him. She walked closer to the jet, her eyes scanning the left engine like an artist studying a half-finished canvas. She didn't even touch it. Yet her mind raced through schematics and memories from her years of study. Richard watched her carefully. "You claim you can fix what my top engineers cannot. That's a bold statement, miss." "Carter. Emily Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm. Dr. Howard muttered under his breath. "More like Emily con artist." A ripple of chuckles ran through the crew. Richard silenced them with a glare. He returned his attention to Emily. "Tell me then, Miss Carter, what's wrong with my engine?" The hangar fell into silence. Emily stepped closer, pointing toward the fuel regulator panel. "You're running diagnostics through the primary system, but the fault isn't there. The secondary ignition relay is misaligned, and the regulator sensor is giving you false readings. That's why your fuel-to-air ratio is stuck out of balance." The words poured out with precise confidence. She didn't hesitate, didn't stumble, didn't guess. It was as though she was reading from a manual only she could see. The engineers exchanged skeptical glances. Some smirked, others scoffed openly. Dr. Howard shook his head in disbelief. That's absurd. We've already tested the relay alignment. Then you didn't test it correctly, Emily shot back, her voice sharper now. Because if you had, you'd know the error isn't in the relay itself, but in the auxiliary override. Richard raised an eyebrow. The girl wasn't just throwing around jargon, her explanation was detailed, specific, and uncomfortably plausible. Howard scoffed louder. Even if by some miracle she's right, sir, letting her touch that engine is dangerous. These systems are delicate. One wrong move could cause millions in damage. Emily turned toward him, her hazel eyes blazing. And yet, here you all are, after hours of trying, still unable to start it. What's more dangerous, Dr. Howard? Letting me try, or letting this jet sit here until your client walks away? That silenced him. The billionaire's jaw tightened. He knew Howard's pride was on the line, but Richard didn't care about pride, he cared about results. The contract waiting for him in Washington was worth billions. Every passing minute felt like a knife twisting deeper into his gut. But giving control of his prized jet to a homeless girl? It sounded insane, reckless, suicidal. If she damaged the engine, not only would the jet be grounded, but his reputation as the titan of aerospace could take a hit he couldn't afford. Still, her eyes. Richard couldn't shake the way she looked at the machine, like it wasn't just metal and wiring, but something alive. It reminded him of himself, decades ago, before wealth and politics and power consumed his life. Back when he was a hungry young engineer, desperate to prove himself. Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice but making sure Richard heard her. You don't have to trust me, Mr. Maxwell. Just trust the fact that you're out of options. The hangar grew colder, quieter. Every engineer held their breath, waiting for Richard's verdict. Finally, the billionaire spoke. You have 10 minutes. Gasps erupted. Dr. Howard protested instantly. Sir, this is madness. Silence, Richard thundered. His voice carried such authority that even the hum of machinery seemed to stop. He turned back to Emily. 10 minutes. Not a second longer. If you fail, I'll personally have security escort you out and make sure you never set foot near one of my facilities again. Do you understand? Emily nodded once. Understood. Richard gestured to the guards. Give her the tools she needs. And watch her every move. As Emily approached the engine, the engineers whispered furiously among themselves. Some mocked her. Others rolled their eyes. But a few, just a few, looked uneasy, wondering if the impossible might actually happen. Emily laid her hand against the cold metal of the jet's engine. For a moment, she closed her eyes, listening. Not to the laughter behind her, not to the ticking clock above her, but to the quiet hum of machinery waiting to breathe again. She whispered under her breath, too softly for anyone else to hear. All right, old friend, let's wake you up. The giant clock above the hangar wall ticked louder than usual, or maybe it only felt that way, because every eye was locked on the young woman in the oversized jacket. 10 minutes. That was all she had. Emily Carter knelt by the left engine, running her fingers across the sleek metal panels. To most, it was just a hunk of machinery. But to her, it was alive. Every hiss, every click, every silent refusal was a language she understood. Tools, she said firmly. One of the guards hesitated, glancing at Richard Maxwell. The billionaire gave a short nod. The guard handed Emily a small toolkit. She opened it quickly, pulling out a torque wrench, a screwdriver, and a flashlight. Her hands moved with surprising confidence, not the fumbling of an amateur, but the precision of someone who had lived and breathed machines her whole life. Dr. Howard stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, smirk plastered across his face. This is ridiculous, he muttered loud enough for others to hear. She's wasting valuable time. This isn't some junkyard carburetor, it's a multi-million-dollar jet engine. Emily ignored him. She climbed a short ladder and leaned into the engine's open maintenance hatch. The metallic scent of fuel and oil hit her immediately. She took a deep breath and began disconnecting the regulator housing, her movements quick and methodical. "Careful with that," an engineer barked. "You'll strip the fittings." But she didn't. Each bolt came loose in smooth, practiced turns. She placed every piece neatly beside her, unlike the chaotic mess of tools the other engineers had left scattered around. Richard Maxwell stood a few feet back, arms behind his back, eyes sharp as blades. He said nothing, but his presence weighed heavy on everyone. He was a man used to results, not patience, and every tick of the clock was eating at him. Emily worked silently, her mind racing. She could almost hear her late father's voice guiding her. "Machines don't lie, Em. They tell you what they need, you just have to listen." She found the relay chamber and froze. The alignment looked off, just as she suspected. But when she reached in with her wrench, she felt resistance. Something was stuck. "Come on," she whispered. She adjusted, tugged harder. A metallic clink echoed, and suddenly the wrench slipped. The sound made several engineers flinch. "There! I told you!" Howard shouted triumphantly. "She's damaging the assembly." Richard's jaw tightened. His instinct was to stop her, shut it down before it was too late. But something in Emily's face made him hesitate. Her eyes didn't show panic. They showed determination. She steadied her breath, adjusted her angle, and slid the wrench deeper. Sweat trickled down her forehead, but her grip never wavered. With a sharp twist, she freed the misaligned relay. The component clicked into place with a satisfying snap. Emily exhaled slowly. Step 1, complete. But the clock ticked mercilessly, 6 minutes left. She climbed down the ladder, wiped her greasy hands on her jacket, and grabbed a small inspection mirror. Crawling under the engine, she checked the auxiliary override connection. Sure enough, the wiring was reversed, an error so subtle even seasoned engineers might miss it. "How did she even?" one of the younger mechanics started to say before Howard silenced him with a glare. Emily began rewiring, her fingers quick but steady. The connectors were stubborn, corroded from exposure. She scraped them clean, sparks flickering briefly in the shadows. Richard stepped closer, his shoes clicking against the concrete. 5 minutes, he said coldly. Emily didn't look up. Plenty of time. Her calmness unsettled him. No one had ever spoken to Richard Maxwell that way. At least, not without trembling. Finally, the wiring clicked into place. Emily slid out from under the engine, grease streaked across her cheek, her hoodie smeared with oil. She looked at the control panel nearby and motioned to an engineer. "Start the secondary diagnostic sequence," she ordered. The engineer blinked, confused. "What? That's—" "Do it," Richard snapped. The engineer flinched, then obeyed. His fingers danced across the keyboard, and the diagnostic screen flickered to life. Numbers rolled, systems checked. Green bars appeared one by one. Then, suddenly an error flashed red across the monitor. "Fuel ratio imbalance still unresolved," the engineer muttered. A wave of snickers rippled through the crew. Howard smirked triumphantly. "Congratulations! She wasted precious minutes and achieved nothing. Sir, with all due respect, we must stop this charade before she—" "Silence," Richard growled, but even he was frowning now. His confidence in her was slipping. The diagnostics still showed failure, and only 3 minutes remained. Emily's jaw clenched. She wasn't wrong, she couldn't be, she thought furiously, eyes darting across the engine. Then it hit her. The misaligned relay had caused a chain reaction. One more component was out of sync. She rushed back up the ladder, heart pounding, and began checking the fuel regulator's bypass valve. Sure enough, it was jammed half shut. "This is it," she whispered. But freeing it would take time she didn't have. Richard glanced at his watch. 2 minutes. Emily's hands moved faster. Her fingers cramped. Grease smeared into her nails. But she didn't stop. She tugged at the valve, twisting with all her strength. Behind her, the engineers chuckled. She's guessing now. She doesn't even have the proper calibration tools. What a joke. But Richard wasn't laughing. He was leaning in, eyes narrowed, watching Emily fight for every second. Something about her refusal to quit reminded him of a younger version of himself, the version who once stayed up 3 nights straight building his first prototype in a garage, back when no one believed in him. The clock ticked louder. 90 seconds. Emily gave one last desperate twist and the valve finally snapped free, clicking into its proper position. She nearly lost her balance but steadied herself on the ladder. Her chest heaved as she looked down at Richard. "It's ready." The hangar went still. No one spoke. All eyes turned to the billionaire. Richard's face was unreadable. Then he turned to his chief mechanic. "Start the ignition sequence." The mechanic hesitated. "Sir, if she's wrong, do it," Richard commanded. The mechanic swallowed hard and tapped the controls. The hangar filled with the whirring sound of turbines spooling up. The massive engine coughed, sputtered, then fell silent. Emily's heart sank. The engineers burst into laughter. Howard threw up his hands in mock victory. "What did I tell you? Nothing but wasted." But before he could finish, the engine roared. The sound was deafening, a thunderous growl that shook the hangar floor. The turbine blades spun with blinding speed, and the diagnostic screen lit up green across the board. The jet's left engine was alive. Emily's eyes widened, a small smile breaking through the grime on her face. She had done it. The laughter died instantly. Engineers stared in disbelief, jaws dropping, voices silenced. Even Howard was frozen, his smirk erased. Richard Maxwell didn't smile, but his eyes, cold and sharp, glimmered with something rare. Respect. The billionaire stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Who are you?" Emily looked him straight in the eye, her voice steady. "I told you, Mr. Maxwell. My name is Emily Carter, and I just fixed your jet." The thunder of the awakened jet engine rolled through the hangar like a beast freed from chains. The massive turbine spun with a steady rhythm, its roar vibrating through the concrete floor and into the bones of every person standing there. For a moment, no one breathed. The impossible had just happened. Emily Carter stood on the ladder, her hoodie streaked with grease, her face illuminated by the orange glow of the spinning blades. She looked nothing like the elite engineers who had failed before her. And yet, in 10 minutes, she had done what they couldn't. The silence broke when one of the younger mechanics whispered, almost reverently, "She actually did it." The words spread like wildfire. Voices rose, first in disbelief, then in awe. Some clapped their hands to their heads, others muttered curses under their breath. But Doctor, Howard's face turned crimson with humiliation. This is impossible," he sputtered, his voice cracking. "There must have been a fluke, some residual alignment from our previous attempts." "No." Richard Maxwell's voice sliced through the noise. Everyone fell silent instantly. The billionaire stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing against the concrete. He fixed Howard with a piercing stare. "Don't insult my intelligence. She fixed it, you didn't." Howard's mouth opened, then closed again. His colleagues looked away, ashamed. The mighty chief engineer, undone by a homeless girl. Before Howard could respond, the sharp click of camera shutters filled the air. Reporters. Word had spread quickly. Rumors of Maxwell's billion-dollar jet grounded on the runway had leaked to the press earlier that morning. Now, journalists and photographers had gathered outside the hangar, and the moment the engine roared to life, they swarmed in like vultures drawn to a carcass. "Mr. Maxwell, is it true your entire engineering team failed to fix the jet? Who is this girl? Was she brought in as a specialist?" "Ma'am, miss, what's your name? How did you do it?" Flashbulbs exploded, microphones shoved forward. Emily squinted against the onslaught of cameras. For years, she had been invisible, just another forgotten face on the streets. Now, suddenly, she was standing at the center of the storm. She climbed down from the ladder slowly, her heart pounding. Her instinct was to retreat, to disappear back into the shadows. But she forced herself to stand tall, even as the press closed in. "She's nobody," Howard snapped bitterly, trying to salvage his pride. "Just a fluke. A lucky guess. We were seconds away from solving it ourselves." The reporters smelled blood. "Are you saying this girl outperformed your team of top engineers? Mr. Maxwell, will she be part of your company now?" Richard raised a hand, silencing the chaos. His presence alone commanded obedience. The cameras stilled, the voices hushed, and all eyes turned to him. Richard's gray eyes studied Emily for a long, tense moment. She stared back, her hazel gaze refusing to drop. Finally, he spoke. "This jet engine was designed by Maxwell Dynamics, my company. It is the most advanced in the world. And yet, when my team of experts failed, this girl fixed it in minutes." A ripple of astonishment rolled through the crowd. Cameras clicked faster. Richard stepped closer to Emily, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Impressive, but one repair doesn't make you a genius. I want to know if it was luck or skill." Emily met his gaze. "Test me, then." The audacity of her reply sent another wave of murmurs through the engineers. Who was this girl to challenge Richard Maxwell himself? But Richard's lips curved ever so slightly, not a smile, but the shadow of one. "You have courage," he said. "But courage without skill is useless." He turned to the reporters. "Everyone out. This demonstration is over." The guards began herding the press out of the hangar. The journalists protested, shouting questions. But Richard's word was law. Within minutes, the massive doors closed, sealing off the chaos outside. The hangar was quiet again, save for the steady hum of the engine. Richard clasped his hands behind his back, studying Emily like a chess player sizing up his opponent. "You knew the problem wasn't what the diagnostics said. You saw past the numbers. Some nada grote. For 80 fall to paid it." Emily nodded. "Machines don't lie. People misread them. Your team was looking for the obvious error, not the real one." Howard bristled. "That's absurd." Richard raised a hand, silencing him again. His eyes never left Emily. "Tell me, Miss Carter, where did you learn to think like that?" Emily hesitated. Memories surged MIT, classrooms filled with equations, professors praising her brilliance. Then the phone call about the accident. Her parents gone, the spiral into debt. The nights on the street, surviving on scraps while staring up at the roar of airplanes overhead. But she didn't tell him all that. Not yet. Instead, she said quietly, "I've studied engines my whole life." Richard's expression gave nothing away. "If that's true, then you won't mind proving it again, on something harder." Emily straightened. "Name it." A faint glimmer of challenge flickered in Richard's eyes. For years, no one in his company had dared defy him. Yet here stood a homeless girl with oil-stained hands, staring him down like an equal. Howard, still fuming, seized the chance. "Yes, let her prove it. If she fails, maybe then we can end this circus and get back to real work." Richard nodded slowly. "Very well. The Washington flight will not be delayed, but before we leave, Miss Carter will face one more test. If she succeeds, I will decide what to do with her. If she fails," his voice grew colder, "she'll walk out of here and never return." Emily's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the hangar, some mocking, some doubting, a few curious. But she refused to show fear. She lifted her chin. "I accept." Richard gave a short nod. "Good. Then prepare yourself, Miss Carter. Because your real test begins now." The jet engine continued to roar in the background, its power filling the air, as though the machine itself was eager to see what came next. The roar of the jet engine faded as Richard Maxwell gestured for it to be shut down. The hangar grew quiet once more, but the air remained electric. Everyone knew what was coming next. Emily Carter stood at the center of the room, grease still smeared across her cheek. Her hazel eyes locked firmly on the billionaire. She had won the first battle, but she could feel the storm building. Richard clasped his hands behind his back, pacing like a general in the war room. "Fixing an ignition alignment under pressure is impressive," he said. "But an engineer is not defined by one lucky repair. It is skill, consistency, and adaptability that matter. You claim to understand machines better than my team? Then prove it." He turned to Dr. Howard, who was still red-faced with humiliation. "Bring her the simulation module." Howard's eyes lit up with cruel satisfaction. "Yes, sir." The engineers moved quickly, wheeling forward a large diagnostic console, sleek black panels, glowing screens, and a complex set of wiring. It was the Maxwell Dynamics Engine Simulation Unit, a training and testing device so advanced that even senior engineers sometimes failed its challenges. It was designed to throw random, near-impossible faults into a simulated engine system, forcing the user to diagnose and repair under time constraints. Howard smirked at Emily as the console powered on, the screen glowing a sharp blue. "Even my top graduates struggle with this test," he said. "But please, show us how your street education measures up." A few engineers chuckled darkly. Others leaned in, curious despite themselves. Richard's expression remained unreadable. He looked at Emily. 10 faults. 15 minutes. No external help. If you succeed, I'll admit you have skill. If you fail, you walk away. Do you accept? Emily's stomach nodded. This wasn't just a test, it was a trap. Howard wanted to see her humiliated in front of everyone. But as fear threatened to rise, she remembered the roar of the engine she had just revived. She remembered the feeling of victory, of proving herself after years of being invisible. She met Richard's eyes. "I accept," Howard sneered. "This will be entertaining." The console beeped, and the simulation began. Warnings flashed across the screen. Fuel pressure loss, ignition failure, turbine overspeed. Dozens of red alerts cascaded down the monitor. Emily inhaled sharply, steadying her thoughts. She pulled up the virtual schematics, her fingers flying across the touchscreen. Her mind visualized the entire engine system: fuel pumps, valves, ignition relays, turbine sensors like an intricate map burned into her memory. The first error was a false reading from the fuel regulator. She bypassed the faulty sensor and recalibrated the input manually. The alert blinked from red to green. "Lucky guess," Howard muttered. Next, ignition failure. Emily dug deeper, spotting the blocked relay. She rerouted the current, and the system hummed back online. Another green light. The engineers grew restless. Some frowned. Others whispered, watching intently as she cut through problems they themselves had struggled with. But the simulation was relentless. The turbine overspeed alert flashed again. Emily's brows furrowed. This wasn't just a system glitch. It was a cascade error triggered by misaligned governor controls. She tapped the calibration module, adjusted the variables, and stabilized the readings. 3 greens. Her pulse quickened. She was in the zone, now seeing patterns others missed, following instincts honed by years of obsession. But the system wasn't done with her. The next alert nearly made her heart stop. Compressor stall detected. The hangar erupted in murmurs. Even some of the engineers exchanged uneasy glances. Compressor stalls were complex, unpredictable, and catastrophic if mishandled. Howard smirked, folding his arms. This should end the circus. Emily's mind raced. She remembered studying compressor stalls back in her MIT days, long before her life fell apart. She visualized the airflow, the imbalance, the unstable cycle. Quickly, she initiated a bleed valve override, adjusted the intake pressure, and stabilized the airflow dynamics. The red alert flickered, then turned green. Gasps echoed across the hangar. 4 down. 6 to go. Emily's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of focus. Sweat rolled down her temple, mixing with the grease already smeared there. She barely noticed Richard watching her like a hawk, his expression still unreadable. The alerts kept coming. fuel pump cavitation fixed, exhaust gas over temperature bypassed, electrical short in the secondary bus rerouted. One by one, Emily dismantled the problems like puzzles only she could solve. With 3 minutes left, 9 out of 10 systems glowed green. Only one remained. The final alert flashed across the screen. Complete system failure. Shutdown imminent. The engineers stiffened. This was the nightmare scenario, the kind of fault that sent even the best scrambling. Howard's smirk returned. She's done for now. Emily's chest tightened. This wasn't a normal fault, this was a chain reaction, a catastrophic failure meant to overwhelm. She scanned the data streams, her eyes darting across thousands of lines of numbers, and then she saw it. A subtle miscommunication between the main control unit and the auxiliary override. It wasn't a failure at all. It was a hidden trap in the simulation, designed to punish those who panicked. Emily smiled faintly. Nice try. Her fingers flew across the screen, overriding the shutdown sequence, realigning the control sync, and restoring full system functionality. The console beeped loudly. 10 green lights filled the screen. Simulation complete. Faults resolved. The hangar erupted in stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Richard Maxwell's sharp gray eyes widened ever so slightly. For the first time that morning, the billionaire's mask of indifference cracked. Howard, meanwhile, looked as though the ground had vanished beneath his feet. His face turned ghostly pale. That's not possible. Nobody completes the simulation in under 15 minutes. Nobody. Emily stepped back from the console, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion, but her gaze steady. She wiped her greasy hands on her jacket and looked Richard straight in the eye. I told you, she said quietly. If you permit, I can fix it. The silence shattered into whispers, gasps, and stares of disbelief. For the first time, Richard Maxwell, billionaire, aerospace titan, untouchable king of machines, felt something rare stirring inside him. Respect. The simulation console went dark, leaving the hangar in stunned silence. 10 flawless green lights still glowed faintly across the black screen. A silent reminder that the impossible had just happened. Richard Maxwell stood frozen for a moment, his sharp gray eyes fixed on the homeless girl who had just outperformed his entire team of engineers. Slowly, deliberately, he began to clap. The sound of his applause echoed across the steel walls of the hangar. One by one, hesitant and reluctant, a few engineers followed. Others stared at Emily as if she were an apparition, something that shouldn't exist, and yet did. Howard, however, did not clap. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked as though his teeth might shatter. He muttered under his breath, This is rigged. It has to be rigged." Emily ignored him. She was too busy catching her breath, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Her hands trembled from adrenaline, but her gaze never wavered. For the first time in years, people were looking at her not as a shadow on the street, but as someone who mattered. Richard broke the silence. "Remarkable," he said. His voice carried a weight that drew every eye back to him. "But I have a question for you, miss." "Carter," Emily said softly. "Emily Carter." Richard nodded slowly. "Miss Carter, where did you learn this?" A murmur swept through the hangar. Everyone leaned in. The question was sharp, but it was fair. No ordinary person could have walked in from the street and dismantled one of the most advanced engine simulations in the country. Emily's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this part. For a moment, her confidence wavered. Shadows of the past clawed at her. But something in Richard's gaze demanding, yes, but not cruel, pushed her to speak. "I studied engineering at MIT, she admitted, her voice low but steady. "I was in the top of my class. Jet propulsion was my obsession. Machines they were everything to me." Gasps rippled through the room. MIT. That name alone commanded respect. Howard spat. "Impossible. We'd know if an MIT graduate was sleeping on the streets of Boston." Emily's jaw tightened. Her eyes flickered with something darker pain. I didn't graduate. I dropped out in my final year. Why? Richard asked, his tone sharper now. The hangar grew so quiet that even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed deafening. Emily swallowed hard. Her voice cracked slightly as she continued. My father worked construction. He died in an accident on site. My mom, she couldn't handle it. She turned to drinking. Bills piled up. Tuition, rent, everything fell apart. Her gaze dropped to the concrete floor, her voice barely above a whisper. I lost my apartment. I lost my mom. I lost everything. I've been on the streets ever since. The silence stretched painfully. Even the cruelest engineers didn't dare laugh now. Her words cut too close, too raw. Howard tried, but even his voice faltered. So what you expect us to believe a dropout with no resources somehow retained the skills to outperform seasoned professionals? Emily finally raised her head, her eyes blazing. Skills don't disappear just because you lose your home. Knowledge doesn't vanish just because life chews you up. If anything, surviving out there alone, with nothing, taught me more about problem solving than any classroom ever could. The hangar buzzed with murmurs. Some engineers looked guilty, others looked impressed. Richard, however, said nothing. His gaze was still locked on her, but his expression was unreadable again. He was a man weighing scales only he could see. Then the silence was shattered by a new sound: click, click, click. Cameras. The media had arrived. A cluster of reporters and photographers rushed into the hangar, security barely able to hold them back. Flashes lit the air as questions bombarded the space. Mr. Maxwell, is it true a homeless girl just outperformed your entire engineering team? Miss Carter, are you the miracle mechanic everyone's talking about? Is Maxwell Dynamics about to hire a street genius? Richard's jaw tightened. He hated the press, especially when they had caught wind of something he hadn't controlled. Howard, seizing his chance, stepped forward. This is a distraction, he barked. A publicity stunt. She's not a certified engineer. She's a dropout. A fraud. The reporters immediately turned to Emily. Microphones pushed into her face. Is that true? Did you lie about your education? Emily's breath caught. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. She hadn't lied, but hearing her past thrown out like dirt in front of flashing cameras was unbearable. Richard raised a hand, silencing the room. His voice cut like a blade. Enough. The reporters froze. Even Howard flinched. Richard stepped closer to Emily, studying her. You've proven skill. You've shown resourcefulness. But the question remains, can I trust you? Emily looked up at him, her hazel eyes burning with defiance despite the tears threatening to fall. You don't have to trust me. Just give me one more chance to prove myself. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. Slowly, he turned to Howard. Prepare the test bench. If she passes one final trial, she stays. Howard's face twisted with fury. He wanted to argue, but Richard's tone left no room for debate. The media went wild. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled furiously. And Emily, standing in the center of it all, exhausted but unbroken, realized this wasn't just about fixing an engine anymore. It was about fixing her life. The hum of machinery filled the cavernous hangar as Richard Maxwell's engineers prepared the Maxwell Dynamics X5000 test bench, a full-scale replica of his newest jet engine. Unlike simulations, this wasn't just data and numbers. It was real hardware. Pipes, turbines, compressors, and combustion chambers, all wired to a central console that could generate enough thrust to rattle the steel walls. Reporters crowded behind the security barricade, cameras trained on the scene. The story had already broken on national news. Homeless girl stuns billionaire by fixing jet engine. Now, the entire country was watching. Emily Carter stood silently in the middle of the chaos, her heart pounding. She had never been under brighter lights. She could feel every eye, engineers, reporters, even the billionaire himself boring into her. Howard strutted across the floor like a vulture circling its prey. "Let's make something clear," he sneered. "This is no simulation. If you make a mistake, the engine could blow. You could cause a fire or worse." Emily held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "If you're trying to scare me, you'll have to do better." The engineers chuckled under their breath, but unease hung in the air. Richard raised a hand, silencing everyone. "The terms are simple," he said. "The X-5000 has a series of faults deliberately introduced into its systems. You will have 20 minutes to identify and repair them. Fail, and you leave. Succeed, and—" his eyes narrowed, calculating. "We'll talk about your future." Emily nodded once. "Understood." The engine roared to life with a deafening growl, its turbines spinning at a dangerous speed. Heat waves shimmered in the air. Lights flickered red across the console, warning signals screaming about system malfunctions. Emily snapped into action. Her hands moved quickly across the diagnostic board, her mind piecing together patterns in the chaos. First fault: fuel mixture imbalance. Too much kerosene flooding the chamber. She twisted the regulator valve, steadying the pressure. One red light turned green. The reporters gasped. The engineers stiffened. Second fault: compressor surge. She rerouted airflow by adjusting the bleed valves. Another red light flipped to green. Howard narrowed his eyes. He leaned toward one of his assistants and whispered something. The assistant hesitated, then discreetly tapped a command into a secondary console connected to the system. Emily suddenly frowned. Something wasn't right. A new fault had appeared, one that shouldn't exist. Ignition crossfire. It was dangerous, and oddly out of place. She glanced up, and her instinct screamed at her. They were trying to sabotage her. Emily clenched her jaw and focused harder. She rerouted ignition timing, bypassed the false fault, and stabilized the chamber. The red light vanished. A murmur spread through the hangar. Howard's smirk faltered. Third fault: hydraulic leak in the actuator controls. She spotted it instantly, patched it by rebalancing the fluid lines. Another green light. Her hands were steady now, her confidence rising with every fix. The hum of the engine smoothed out, its rhythm shifting from chaos to harmony. But then suddenly the entire console lit up blood red. System critical failure. Emergency shutdown imminent. The reporters gasped. Engineers exchanged shocked glances. Even Richard stepped forward, his jaw tight. Howard smirked again, his trap sprung. Emily froze for half a second, sweat dripping down her temple. The engine screamed, its turbines shrieking as if about to tear themselves apart. If she failed now, it wouldn't just be humiliation, it could be disaster. She closed her eyes for a split second, blocking out the panic, the lights, the noise. She pictured the engine in her mind, every valve, every wire, every moving part. And then she saw it. The problem wasn't mechanical, it was electrical. Someone had triggered a false cascade shutdown by injecting bad data into the system. Her eyes snapped open. She dove for the auxiliary panel, ripped off the access cover, and manually rewired the override connection. Sparks flew, the smell of burning insulation filling the air. The engine sputtered, then steadied. The console blinked. One red light turned green, then another, then all of them. The engine purred like a living beast, smooth and flawless. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the X-5000. Then the hangar exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted over each other. "Unbelievable! She saved it! Live on camera, this girl just beat the impossible." Some engineers stared at Emily with awe. Others looked ashamed. And Howard looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Richard Maxwell approached slowly, his gaze never leaving her. He stopped just a few feet away, his voice low but carrying through the room. "You knew someone sabotaged the system," he said. Not a question, a statement. Emily wiped grease and sweat from her face, meeting his eyes. "Yes, and I fixed it anyway." Richard studied her for a long moment, His jaw tightened, his expression unreadable. And then, for the first time, a faint smile touched his lips. "Remarkable," he said quietly. "Truly remarkable." Howard tried to protest. "This is absurd. She's a fraud. She's—" Richard cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice steel. "Enough, Howard. I don't tolerate incompetence or dishonesty. Not from anyone." The billionaire turned back to Emily. "You've done more in an hour than my team has in a week. You've proven skill under pressure. The only question left is, what do you want?" The hangar fell silent again. Every camera, every microphone, every pair of eyes locked on Emily Carter, the homeless girl who had just tamed a billion-dollar machine. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine something she had thought impossible. A future. The hum of the X5000 test bench finally quieted as the engine powered down, the turbines slowing to silence. The air inside the hangar was still vibrating from the performance Emily Carter had just delivered. Cameras still flashed, reporters still shouted, but all the noise seemed to fade as Richard Maxwell turned toward her. For a moment, the billionaire said nothing. He simply studied the young woman before him, the grease on her hands, the fire in her eyes, the exhaustion etched into her face. Then, with deliberate calm, he spoke. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who commanded empires. "You just accomplished what some of the brightest minds in aerospace engineering have failed to do under pressure. You stabilized my test bench under sabotage, and you exposed weaknesses in my team. I'll ask again, and this time I expect an answer." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "What do you want?" Emily froze. The question hit harder than any insult, harder than any trial. For years, she had wanted only survival, warmth, food, shelter. She had never allowed herself to think beyond the next day. But now, with cameras flashing, the press shouting, and a billionaire demanding an answer, her mind raced. Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, gathering strength. "I want a chance. A chance to use what I know. A chance to not be invisible anymore," the crowd murmured. The reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a headline forming. Richard's sharp eyes softened just slightly. "A chance, then. Consider it granted." Gasps echoed across the room. Richard raised his hand toward his team of engineers. "Effective immediately, Emily Carter will join Maxwell Dynamics as a junior consultant under my direct supervision." Reporters nearly toppled over each other, shouting questions. "Mr. Maxwell, are you hiring a homeless woman off the streets?" "Emily, how does it feel to go from invisible to the center of the nation's biggest aerospace story? Do you realize this moment is going viral right now?" Emily's knees wobbled, and she gripped the console to steady herself. She wanted to cry, but she refused not here, not in front of them. Instead, she lifted her chin. "I'll prove myself every day. You won't regret this." The press exploded in a frenzy. Headlines were already being typed. From streets to sky. Homeless girl becomes billionaire's secret weapon. But not everyone was celebrating. Howard's face burned red with fury. He clenched his fists so hard his knuckles whitened. He had spent decades clawing his way into Maxwell's inner circle, and now, in one morning, a street rat had stolen his spotlight. His eyes narrowed on Emily with a hatred that promised revenge. As the chaos swirled, Richard leaned closer to Emily. His voice dropped to something only she could hear. "Don't mistake this for charity. I don't do pity hires. I expect results. And if you fail me, this opportunity ends as quickly as it began." Emily met his gaze. Her voice was quiet, but resolute. "I won't fail." For the first time, Richard allowed himself the faintest of smiles. The press conference ended, and security ushered reporters out of the hangar. But even as the crowd dispersed, Emily could hear the chatter in the distance. Her name, her story, her transformation. She was no longer invisible. But visibility came with a price. That evening, As she sat alone in a quiet corner of the company's research wing, her new ID badge still warm in her hand, Emily allowed herself a rare smile. For the first time in years, she wasn't sleeping on a cold sidewalk. She wasn't begging for scraps. She wasn't a ghost. She was somebody, but her smile faded when she overheard voices outside the door. "Howard, we can't let her stay," he hissed. "If she proves herself again, Richard will replace half the board with people like her. Do you understand what that means? Our careers, our contracts, everything we built it will all collapse." A second voice, lower and more hesitant, replied, "But sir, she beat the simulation. She stabilized the test bench. She—" "Silence!" Howard snapped. "She embarrassed me in front of Richard. In front of the world. That's unforgivable. We'll discredit her, expose her past, paint her as unstable. If that doesn't work," his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "then we'll make sure she doesn't survive the next trial." Emily's blood ran cold. She pressed her back against the wall, her breath shallow. They weren't just jealous, they were planning something darker. The next morning, when she walked into Maxwell Dynamics' gleaming headquarters in downtown Manhattan, cameras were already waiting. Her face was on newspapers, her story trending online. Some called her a genius, others called her a fraud. And as she stepped through the glass doors, she realized two things at once. The opportunity of a lifetime was in her hands, and so was the danger of her enemies. The next few days moved like a whirlwind. Emily Carter was no longer just a shadow living under bridges and warming herself beside trash can fires. She was on every news channel, every blog, every trending feed across America. At first, she thought the attention might fade, but the opposite happened. Each day, more reporters gathered outside Maxwell Dynamics' skyscraper headquarters in Manhattan, hoping to catch a glimpse of the homeless girl genius. Strangers pointed at her in the street, whispering as she walked past in borrowed clothes and scuffed sneakers. Inside the company, things were no calmer. Engineers eyed her with suspicion, some whispering when she passed, others openly scoffing. A few younger techs admired her courage, sneaking smiles of encouragement, but they were drowned out by the hostility radiating from Howard and his loyal circle. Richard Maxwell remained distant, though watchful. He had placed Emily under a probationary program, allowing her to shadow his engineers while giving her access to technical resources she hadn't touched in years. She spent long nights hunched over schematics, her eyes tracing blueprints like old friends. Machines were her sanctuary. They didn't laugh, didn't doubt, didn't betray. But Howard's words echoed in her head every time she touched a tool. "We'll make sure she doesn't survive the next trial." She didn't know when or how, but she knew he was planning something. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. On the fourth day, Richard summoned his entire engineering team into the top-floor conference room. The space overlooked the Manhattan skyline, glass walls reflecting the city's endless pulse of light. Richard stood at the head of the table, immaculate in a tailored navy suit. "Our next demonstration is in 48 hours, he said. "The X5000 will be tested live in front of investors, government officials, and the press. Billions of dollars, contracts, and the future of this company ride on that engine." The room buzzed with tension. Richard raised a hand for silence. "And Emily Carter will be assisting with the preparations." The announcement dropped like a bomb. Howard immediately stood, his face red. "Sir, with respect, this is reckless. She's unvetted, untrained, uncredentialed." Richard's gaze cut through him like a knife. "She's proven herself under pressure. Twice. Unless you've forgotten, Howard, you nearly lost us an engine last week. She saved it." Snickers rippled quietly around the room. Howard sat back down, seething. Emily kept her eyes forward, refusing to react. She could feel the hatred radiating from him, but she also felt Richard's faith measured, cautious, but real. It was enough. After the meeting, as the team dispersed, Howard pulled two of his men aside. Their conversation was hushed, but Emily caught fragments as she lingered in the hallway. Inject a fault during the run. Make it look like her mistake. Maxwell won't defend her a third time. Her stomach twisted. They were going to sabotage the live demonstration. And if she was blamed in front of investors, her fragile chance at a new life would be over before it began. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat alone in the corner of her temporary apartment, a company-provided studio with bare walls and humming air vents. The city lights painted patterns across her face as she stared at the floor, replaying her options. If she told Richard, would he even believe her? Or would he see it as paranoia, desperation? She remembered the years of being dismissed, ignored, invisible. People didn't believe the homeless, no matter how true their words were. No, she couldn't just warn him. She had to prove it. The next morning, she slipped into the hangar before dawn. The X5000 loomed like a sleeping beast, its polished turbine blades glinting under the fluorescent lights. She ran her hands along the engine's frame, whispering under her breath like it was an old friend. "They're coming for us," she murmured. "But I won't let them win." Hours later, as the preparations began, she kept her eyes sharp. Howard and his men moved around the engine with practiced motions. But Emily noticed the subtle hesitation, the way one of them lingered too long near the auxiliary coolant feed, the way another adjusted a panel then glanced over his shoulder. They were planting faults. Emily's heart pounded. She had to act fast, but not carelessly. If she exposed them too soon, they'd deny everything. If she waited too long, the sabotage might succeed and destroy her. When Richard entered with a group of executives, the room snapped to attention. "Let's begin preliminary diagnostics," he ordered. "If there's even a hint of instability, tomorrow's demonstration is canceled." Howard flashed a tight smile. "Of course, sir. We've ensured everything is perfect." Emily's chest tightened. The trap was set. As the test sequence initiated, alarms began flashing just as she expected. Coolant pressure dropping, combustion chamber overheating, turbine instability. Howard immediately turned toward Richard, feigning shock. "Sir, she must have tampered with the system. She's been here unsupervised." Emily cut him off, her voice ringing clear. "No. They planted this." The room fell silent. Howard laughed coldly. "Planted? Really? That's your excuse? A street rat accusing professionals?" Richard's gaze shifted between them, calculating, cold. The room held its breath. Emily stepped forward, her voice firm despite the fear twisting her insides. "Give me 10 minutes. Let me prove it. If I'm wrong, I'll walk out and never return. But if I'm right..." She let the words hang, her hazel eyes locked on Richard. "Then you'll know who you can trust." The billionaire studied her for a long, agonizing moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You have 10 minutes. The clock started. Emily's hands flew across the console, tracing faults, bypassing sabotage, exposing rerouted circuits. She narrated her work as she went, her voice steady and clear, forcing Howard's lies into the light. And with every passing second, she felt the weight of two futures pressing down on her, one leading back to the streets, the other into the sky. The hangar felt like it was holding its breath. The ticking of the countdown clock echoed louder than the hum of the generators, each second hammering into Emily's chest. She crouched by the control panel, her hands moving with a precision she hadn't felt in years. Every move mattered. "Coolant pressure rerouted," she muttered under her breath. "Turbine sensors tampered." She ripped open a panel, revealing wires spliced crudely together. She held them up for everyone to see. "This isn't wear and tear. This was deliberate." Gasps rippled through the engineers. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Keep going." Howard's face flushed, but he forced a smirk. "Anyone could have spliced wires, sir. She's framing us." Emily ignored him. Her fingers flew, reconnecting circuits, stabilizing flow systems. Sparks snapped, metal clanged, alarms blared. Sweat trickled down her brow, but her focus was absolute. The engine's heart roared beneath her touch, like a beast awakening. 3 minutes! Someone shouted. Emily's pulse thundered. She crawled deeper into the access bay, pulling out a screwdriver so worn the grip was nearly smooth. It wasn't company-issued, it was hers. The same one she'd carried since her first engineering class, before her world fell apart. The sight of it steadied her trembling hands. "Come on," she whispered. "Don't fail me now." She reconnected the final sequence, twisted the screwdriver with every ounce of strength she had, and slammed the access panel shut. "Diagnostics rerun now," she barked. The system whirred. Alarms faded one by one. Lights shifted from flashing red to steady green. Then, with a thunderous roar, the X-5000's turbines spun to life, blades slicing air in a perfect, flawless rhythm. The engine stabilized. The room erupted in disbelief. Engineers clapped their hands over their mouths, executives muttered curses of shock, and reporters scribbled furiously. Richard Maxwell didn't move. His gray eyes locked on the roaring engine, then on Emily, crouched and gasping. Her hands blackened with grease and smoke. Howard tried again, desperate now. "Sir, this proves nothing. She could have set this up herself." "Enough!" Richard's voice boomed like thunder. He stepped forward, his expression carved in stone. "You've insulted me for the last time, Howard." The room went dead silent. Richard pointed toward the spliced wires Emily had displayed. "That is sabotage. Sloppy, cowardly sabotage. And I trusted you to protect this company," Howard stammered, but the words wouldn't come. 2 security guards stepped forward at Richard's nod. Howard's face drained of color as they grabbed his arms, dragging him back. His protests echoed uselessly against the steel walls. Richard turned to Emily. For the first time, the mask of the untouchable billionaire cracked. Respect, real, unfeigned respect shone in his eyes. "You didn't just save my engine," he said slowly. "You saved my company, my future." Emily's breath caught. For years, she had been invisible, discarded, ignored. And now, standing before a man who had everything, she felt something she hadn't in so long. Seen. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing, questions flying. "Emily, how did you do it? What's your background? Who are you really?" Richard raised a hand, silencing them. He looked at Emily as if weighing something heavy in his mind, then spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the hangar. "Who is she? She's the future of Maxwell Dynamics. Effective immediately, Emily Carter is our new Chief Innovation Engineer." The room exploded. Gasps, applause, shouts. Emily's knees nearly gave out. She shook her head in disbelief. I can't. I don't even—" "Yes, you can." Richard's voice softened, almost paternal now. "Because when everyone else failed, when everyone else made excuses, you fixed it. You earned this." Tears burned in her eyes. For so long, she had been nothing more than a ghost in alleyways, a forgotten girl begging for scraps. And now, the world was watching as her life was rewritten in an instant. Richard extended a hand. She stared at it, grease-stained fingers trembling, then slowly placed her hand in his. The cameras flashed brighter. For the first time in years, Emily smiled. Not the broken, weary smile of survival, but one of hope. The X-5000 thundered behind her, a machine reborn. And in that moment, Emily realized something. She wasn't just fixing engines anymore. She was fixing herself. The girl the world had ignored had become the woman no one could forget. And as Richard whispered one final line, it carried through the hangar like destiny itself. "The girl who fixed my jet fixed my heart, too."